Today we'll talk about business model validation. We talked about business model definition last time. All right, so this is the quick recap. We are now here. So what we'll do today is I'll do today is quick recap of what we did last time and then go forward from there. Because last time we talked about what are the key elements of defining a business model. And once you define a business model, as always, we have to actually quantitatively validate it, right? So first recap. What we talked about last time was that there are 4 steps of or 4 steps involved in defining a business model. So first and foremost, the business model definition should happen after you have validated user model and value model. It should not happen before. In a lot of literature that you read out there, in fact, in most of the literature that you read out there, the business model actually, the discussion starts with business model. But that is very premature because you don't even know how you're going to create value. And therefore, it's very difficult to figure out what's the right business model. So first validate user and value model and then start thinking of business model. Second part is that when you look at the business model, you have to first and foremost think about how will you generate revenue. Revenue depends on pricing of your products, and pricing in turn depends on 2 things: pricing structure and pricing strategy. Pricing structure, like we talked about, depends on 3 things, which is input metric, output metric, or outcome metric. And you have to pick the right metric to base your pricing model on. And pricing strategy depends on your value strategy. So which means that if you choose to build a performance-led startup, so if you use performance-led strategy as your value strategy, then typically you want to use a premium pricing strategy. If you choose an effort-led strategy, then typically you would want to choose an aggressive strategy. And if you choose access-led strategy, then typically you would want to use the following strategy. So there are 3 different strategies which are corresponding to 3 different value strategies there, right? Next, after revenues comes the cost. And there we have to actually look at 2 things. One, we have to look at the fixed cost, which is the cost that is associated with building the products. Fixed cost does not change proportional to the number of units you are selling. So that's why it's called fixed cost. I'll talk about fixed cost a little more, recap of that today. And last, you have to think about the variable cost, which is the incremental cost you have to bear to build 1 unit of product and give it to the customer, right? So those are the costs. That also involves the cost of customer acquisition. So you have to think about that. So those are the elements you have to think about when you're defining your business model. After you do that, then you have to actually validate that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Validating a business model has 3 parts. First, you have to build a minimum viable product, MVP, right, to deliver value to customers. And if you recall, we did value model validation with co-creators, with innovators. We did the user model validation with co-creators. We did the value model validation with early adopters, and the business model validation happens with the early majority users. And the reason for this is that the first 2 sets, co-creators as well as early adopters, are a little more reluctant to pay too much money, and they instead prefer to pay in other ways, which is by giving you feedback, by spreading the word about the product, and so on. So really, this is the point where you find customers who are more than happy to give you to pay a good price for your product, but the counter or downside of that is they are not looking for a new solution. So it becomes the responsibility of the startup to figure out ways to reach out to them, and which is why GTM becomes very important. Second, we have to think about the unit economics, and I'll talk about what unit economics are and how you can do that to figure out are you going to become eventually profitable or not. And third, and I think this goes without saying, that this does not happen in 1 step. Typically, you have to actually experiment a lot here. In fact, the iterations happens across the 3. You have to oftentimes go back to user model, figure out a new set of users, perhaps new use cases, come back to the value model, define it again, make sure that you validate it, and then come back to business model. So there's a loop that happens. Then you have to go back around and around again around this. Right? So those are the 3 parts of business model validation. All right, so let's go through them one by one. So part 1, MVP and early majority customers. Right? So the real, the chunk of the users that you have in the market, if you remember the curve, the adoption curve, right, the crossing the chasm curve, it has roughly 13%, 16% of users which are co-creators and early adopters, 34% users who are typically in the early majority segment, 34%, another 34% in the late majority, and then 16% in the are referred to as laggards, right? So these two, early majority and late majority, together form 68% of the market, right? In a normal distribution, right? Obviously, in the beginning, when you have very innovative product, the markets don't have normal distribution, but over time it will settle down to that. So these two, early majority and late majority, together correspond to a largest chunk of the market, and which is why it's referred to as market. When people talk about product market fit, they're talking about this set of users as market, right? So that's where an MVP, the V part of V, is viable. Viable because your product needs to be viable, as in they need to generate enough revenue for you so that you can make profits out of it, right? So that's the part. So that's what we are looking at. We're looking at these two, we're actually starting at only early majority customers and seeing if we can actually make money from them, right? So that's basically the idea. Now MVP, and you would have, anyone who has done any startups or has read about startup would have come across MVP term. And there's a lot of talk about how MVP should be defined. And this is one way people have described that MVP should be, so typically when you build a product, first and foremost, you'll have some functionality. That's the bottom layer, functional part of it. Then you have to work on it to make it reliable. That's the second layer. Then you have to make it usable. So basically make better user interfaces, UI, UX part of it, right? And finally, you have to basically start thinking about, actually UI, UX, design, usable are kind of one part, but basically you have to think about various components. Slowly you have to improve the product. And the recommendation is that you should not just build the functionality, you should take a slice of the whole thing and build some elements of each of that, right? And if you search, if you go to internet and look at it, you will see pictures like this. So MVP should not be built like that. You want to not make one tire, then the 2 tires, and then put the chassis and put the car, right? Instead, what you want to do, you want to start building something that is usable right in the beginning, and then slowly improve it, right? So starting from a skateboard to a scooter to a cycle to a motorcycle and then to a car, right? This is how people describe it. This is not the right way of describing it. Better way of doing it is this, because these are different products. These are different products targeting different users, different scenarios. So this actually is a wrong representation. But I think the point is that start small, slowly build functionality. This is a better representation of this, right? If you really want to make a Ferrari, start with actually this is also not the best way. I'll actually give you a real example how it can be done, right? But essentially start small, make something that is usable, and then slowly, incrementally improve it, right? That's basically the essence of it, right? So here's an example of what can be done. This is a non-profit initiative that I'm leading, right? And what we're doing is we're saying that we want to build a science computer. We want to build a computer as in quotes, a system, a platform, so that if you want to do science experiments, you write them as a program, a sequence of instructions, and then you say execute, and that program should get executed on some real lab in an automated manner. So you should not have to go to the lab and do the experiment manually, right? So the layers that are needed to build such a computer are those 3 layers. The top is the universal lab abstraction, which basically corresponds to, actually you can have a mental picture if you're familiar with Java and Java's ecosystem. Java has 3 layers. The top layer is called JVM, Java Virtual Machine. The next is called JRE, which is Java Runtime Environment. And the bottom is called JNI, which is Java Native Interfaces. So corresponding to that, you can visualize these 3. So the top is a universal lab abstraction, which is basically visualize a lab which can run any experiment, right? So you don't have to worry about which equipment it has, it will run the experiment, right? So that's the universal lab abstraction. Next layer, actually the bottom layer is the lab interfaces, where you map these logical things to actual things, right? So you actually, when you say, I need to pipette 10 ml of liquid, it will figure out which machine to pick, how to suck, or how to aspirate 10 ml, and so on and so forth. So those are the low-level actions that need to be done, right? And in between is the engine, which actually runs the experiment, or runs each instruction one by one, right? So those are the three layers. Now you can imagine this is not a trivial exercise, right? Because this requires understanding what equipment you have in the lab. This requires reasonably good robotic system which can handle all the equipment, and so on and so forth, right? So there are many parts of it. So the way to break this up into MVP is to take one slice of this across. As you can see, the blue ones are the slice, right, corresponding to the image that you can see on the top, right? This is a slice you can take out of it, saying, I cannot build everything up front, so let me take one small part of it, let me build it. And that's what we call robotic application stack. So it is not yet a lab environment, it does not handle equipment, instruments, but it is able to remotely execute instructions that you give it to, right? So that's basically, so what you need to do an MVP is to figure out what's the smallest subset of functionality that will create value for some users, right? So that's basically what you need to build. The reason you need to do that is basically, so just to give you details of how the robotic application stack, RAS, which sits on top of ROS, the way it works is mentioned here, but I will not get into the detail of that. But the important point is that you want to build something usable so that people can start using it. If they actually start using it, you get feedback from them. And that's what helps you to improve the system. So you don't want to build for 2 years and then figure out whether people are going to use it or not. You want to start getting the product out in the market as soon as possible, right? A usable product which creates value for something. Okay, so let me now with that give you a couple of examples of companies that have actually done this journey, right? We talked about MU, which is minimum unbundled product. Then we talked about MUP plus, which is minimum unbundled product with a value promise. And then now MVP, right? Here's an example of a company which is Onco, which is an end-to-end cancer treatment, right? So what they say is that as of today, the cancer treatment is broken, right? That whole pipeline is broken because when you go to a hospital, if someone that you know has cancer and you accompany them, what happens is that there is a little bit of, well, you can call it lack of trust or mismatch of objectives between the patients and the hospitals, right? The objective of hospitals from a business point of view is to maximize their revenue. So they will prescribe as many tests as they want to, right? Or in some cases, insurance requires them to run many tests. So one way or another, there is a mistrust between what happens there and what the patient wants, right? So building this system is a complicated thing because it has many layers. You have to start with the initial biopsy to the, whether that, cancer is detected or not detected, then the treatment, which might require radiation or surgery or whatever, right? So there are many steps. So what Onco said was, we can't build all of it. Let's start with early adopters who are people who are looking for second opinion. You got a cancer, you did biopsy, you got some feedback back, which let's say says there is cancer. Typically, you want to double check. You want to check with an expert, right? That's what they did. They said, okay, let's build a tumor board, which is a group of doctors who are experts in the field, right? And if a patient wants to get second opinion, they can upload all the diagnosis they've got from the primary, from the initial service provider, and the board will review all the documents and come back to you saying whether they agree or not agree with the diagnosis, right? So that's the first thing, right? That itself got a good response from the target audience, right? But it was early adopters because these are people who are very much aware of, they had researched about cancer, they knew about, they had a few questions and they wanted to ask those questions and they were looking for a solution, right? So that's the definition of early adopter. They're looking for a solution. early majority customers don't look for solutions. You have to go to them, right? So what Onco did after they succeeded in the first part, they started partnering with hospitals. So they would go set up a kiosk in, let's say, in Fortis or in Manipal. And if a patient comes there, they would basically say, we can help you, right? And they would basically, the idea was that now we should handhold patients throughout the journey. From the time they want to go through the diagnosis to the end of the, till the recovery fully happens, right? They want to be part of that journey, right? So to do that, they basically started tying up with hospitals. They tied up with hospitals to get them earlier appointments, because getting appointments early is a challenge. And of course, they did one more thing to break this mistrust, to say you will have a care manager assigned to you who is on your side, not on the hospital side. That care manager will review everything and will be with you throughout the journey and suggest to you a better option, right? And in this, by doing this, so first of all, it's an asset-light model. They have not built a hospital, but they have taken functionalities from different hospitals, best-in-class capabilities from this hospital, and recombined them, so to say, right? So that's what they did. And the metric they use to say whether this is working or not working is number of retained patients, right? The reason this metric is important is because eventually revenue will come, but you need a metric which is correlated with revenue, right? That's what you want to do. And that's basically gave them a sense that, if they're retaining more and more patients through, through this journey, then they must be doing a good job, right? So that's how I look at it. Right. Let's look at a deep tech or a hardware company. Have you heard of Log9 Materials? Yeah, so at least a few people have. So Log9 Materials is basically a battery manufacturer, right? And what they did basically, they basically came up with a new battery, and the core use case was that the battery should have very fast charging capability, right? Typically, I think I have it somewhere, but I'll talk about it. But typically, is it there? No, it's not there. Okay. Typically, it takes half an hour to 40 minutes for you to get to 80% charge, right? A Tesla, for example, battery takes that long, right? That becomes an issue when you have last mile delivery. So you have the delivery partners, going back and forth and delivering products. Or if you have, let's say, a small truck, which is delivering within the city, if you have to have a downtime of 40 minutes every 300 kilometers, that's a large, underutilization of your assets. So they said, okay, we must have a way so that you can actually do this fast charging, right? So, and for this, they focused only on B2B sector. They said, yes, the EV cars and, personal two-wheelers are large segment, but we'll not go there. So their strategy, as you can see from this, was performance-led. Very, very clear that we will have the fast charging battery as a core value proposition. And the value promise was, this is in the MUP plus play stage, that it will be 9x or 10x faster charging and 9x longer life, right? So first is the charging, which is performance. Life is now the cost side of the angle, right? So they basically brought in the cost side, and I'll tell you how that happened. All right, so let's see how this happened. So they started first by looking at, actually they looked at something else before this, aluminum air batteries. They found that's not the right thing to do. Quickly came to lithium titanate, I think it's called, batteries. And like I said, it's got much faster charging time, less than 10 minutes. And Tesla's batteries have 30 minutes for 80% charge. The downside, of course, if it's something good, there has to be something not good. The downside is that the LTO batteries have shorter range. So they have less energy density, so you can't have as much, it can't hold as much charge, right? Therefore, the range that you get is less, right? And that's why a Tesla will not come to this, right? A car which is personal, intercity driving, let's say if you want to go from here to Chennai, 350 kilometers, you don't want to stop in between and charge it, right? So there are different parameters. And these guys are very clearly, targeting hub and spoke model, where the assets can come back to the hub and get recharged, right? The next step was to actually start looking at the early adopters, and for this they went after the commercial fleet operators, right? Because they have assets that need to get utilized more, right? towards this, they basically started looking at saying how, knowing very well that LTO batteries have less energy density, how can they increase? So maximize performance given the constraint that they are operating in, right? And optimize the product to be suitable for Indian environment. High humidity, high heat, very unique to actually India and tropical countries. So how can you make sure the batteries work well there? So that's your MUP plus. MVP is when you start thinking about the money, right? And MVP is when they started thinking about, okay, how can we reduce the total cost of ownership? Because if I am to sell to commercial fleet operators, right, the two-wheeler, three-wheelers, and the four-wheelers, which are using for this logistics, last mile logistics, then the cost has to be low. And the way you do that is to increase the life of the cycle, life of the battery. And that's what they focused on. And what they focus on, dollars per cycle, as in cycle is how many times it can run, how many times it can recharge. So 15,000 plus times it can be recharged, right? And they also said this 10 or 15 minute charging should not overheat the battery, right? So that's the thermal management part of it. And now they are ready to start working with customers who can pay them money. So commercial fleet operators was more of a pilot. They were testing, proving to everyone and to themselves that this can work. Now Omega, Seiki, and Hala is now where they're saying, okay, now bundle it. Let's start, selling it to real mainstream early majority customers. Right? So that's the sequence of steps typically you have to go through. So don't get to MVP very, very quickly because it requires too many moving parts, right? You have to first figure out who your users are, then figure out what's the right way of delivering value to them. Then you should think about the making money, right? So there's a sequence of steps, right? Yeah. Yes.
And its longer life cycle life means that each cycle the amount of distance it will go or the
No.
total number of cycles
Total number of cycles will be. So the distance, how long it can go is dependent on energy density, right? So or you can have much bigger battery, right? So the size of the battery is basically density, right? So the density decides how long it can go, and how many times you can recharge is the cycle, is the life of the battery. So if you can charge 15,000 times, so if let's say it is getting charged 300 times in a year, so 15,000 by 300, कितना हुआ? 2 0 निकल गए 350 साल, right? Roughly. That's at least or you can actually divide by 10 if you're charging. Anyway, something, yeah.
Were they focusing on removable batteries or permanent batteries?
No, so aluminum air batteries were removable. So you had to replace the anode. But this is actually go back, plug it in. Let me show. So you see this, the thing? That's called Insta Charge. So you actually just go there and you charge it.
There are some in Bangalore also.
It's a Bangalore-based company. It has raised $90 million. So it's actually a successful company. 25% of India's commercial fleet runs on their batteries. So it's a successful company. And they also had this thing that they would send you a truck and they will charge it. Right? So it has a battery. It has, right? So basically, but it's the battery and you just recharge it again. But the whole point is that it will recharge much faster.
Will the removable battery business not replace it? Because I have seen that also in Bangalore.
That is
that is a easy way. If you have all the batteries of the same company, let's say,
yeah,
just go and remove yours and
correct.
put the other one pays.
So those are two different value models, right? So one has to now look at which value model is going to deliver more value in the long term, right? So both are viable, valid value models. So one, eventually, I don't know which one will win. I don't know the answer to that. So, but I think, yeah, definitely that's a, see the downside of, a replaceable battery model, or downside, I don't know, it has a higher initial investment requirement, right? Because you have to build these all these places where you can go replace the battery, right? So you need to now have these like equivalent of petrol stations all over, right? They are doing hub and spoke models. So they are right now only going after commercial customers. So you could say they could also go after, with a replaceable battery, if you go after the commercial, then you might not need the that large network, right? Yeah. But you're right, basically both have roughly the same essence in terms of the cost side of it, which is setting up these network, right? But which value model is better, I don't know, right? So both were worth looking at it. Someone should look at this and make a thesis saying this is better than that, right? So all right, so let's look at the second part, which I think is going to be the core of what we're going to talk about today. So it's got, I think, 5 or 6 steps. So one builds on top of it, right? One top builds on top of the previous one. So first and foremost, what is unit in unit economics? So unit is basically how to figure out one small whatever experience or whatever that can yield some money to you, right? So to take an example of Agnikul, which is basically does 3D printed rockets, a single rocket launch is a unit, because there are certain costs associated with that, and you need to figure out, are you going to make money on that launch or not, right? If you're talking about a eye stem, then a single dose of that therapy is the unit, right? So basically, you need to first define what is the unit you want to work with, right? A unit can be user also. A customer can also be a unit in some cases, right? So but first and foremost, you have to define what is that unit you want to operate with. Second, you have to figure out what is the revenue per unit, right? So how much money can you make on, per activity from the user? So I think we talked about last time that revenue depends on pricing, and pricing itself depends on willingness to pay, WTP. Of course, it depends on ability to pay, ATP and WTP, but it also depends on the pricing strategy and structure. In addition, it depends on who your competitors are and what are the current available pricing anchors in the market, right? So you're basically, so those are the first set. Examples are, if you think you're Niramai, like medtech company, right, which goes after breast cancer detection, then per scan, revenue per scan becomes the unit of revenue, right? Or if you log material, log 9, the example we discussed, then per battery sold is the unit, right? So basically, yeah.
Let's assume I bought a washing machine.
Okay.
So, will the cost of the, let's say, repair, I'm calling from the company,
Yes.
if it gets something defect, okay? So, will I consider some, let's say, average that 2 times the person will call us for the repair?
Yes, yes.
So, can I also include that in the unit of sale?
No, that is, so we'll talk about that's on the cost side, right? And that's a variable cost. So every time I have to come and deliver value, or make sure that the product delivers value to you, that's a value delivery cost, right? So that's on the cost side. But if you're making money from that, then yeah, no, that's a separate head, right? But if you were to lease the washing machine, then it becomes different, right? Then the revenue per unit. So when you buy the washing machine, the unit is that activity of purchase. So the 20,000 rupees is the revenue per unit. Now, if you say that I will not sell washing machines, let's say ISC in hostels says I want to lease these machines and I want to take on rent, right? Then, and the washing machine person deploys their own person, or let's say it's an automated machine, every cycle of that can be a pricing point. So revenue per unit will be every cycle, wash cycle, are you charging 1 rupee, 5 rupee, 10 rupee, whatever that. That's revenue per unit in that case. So the unit can differ depending on what pricing strategy, pricing model that you're using, right? So that's why it's important to figure out what's the right revenue per unit, what's a unit, and what's the revenue per unit, right?
Generally companies have a lot of data, right? So can't they generally make it average that, okay, for any product, let's say
Yes.
that average, this is the average that number of people will do this thing. So
Yeah.
how is this then a variable cost? It will become a constant cost. In this case, let's say that we have seen over 10,000 people that generally every person costs 2 times in their lifetime. So that will become a.
I think there's a variability across different users. So if you average it out across all the users, you amortize the life of the product, let's say this laptop, and you figure out how many times it got used during its life, and you say that per use you will pay me this much, right? Plus add the time value of money, because right now you're charging me upfront everything, and instead of in the variable cost model, recurring payment model, you're charging me per usage. So your payments are getting spread out into future, right? So you factor in the time value of money, and you increase your margin. Then I think you can come up with a formula to come up with the right thing, which is what people do when they move from a one-time pricing model to a recurring pricing model. That's basically the math they do, right? But still on the revenue side, the cost side is different. So I think let's come to that. Let's not mix the pricing of the product with the cost of the product. What does it take to deliver that value, right? So which is actually the next point. So let's come to that, right? So this is the variable cost. So there are three components of variable cost. First is what does it take to create that value. Second is what does it take to deliver that value, and last is what does it take to acquire a customer so that we can deliver value to them. Right? So those are the three things. So what does it mean? What do these terms mean? Right? So first is value creation cost, VCC, is basically cost associated with producing one unit. So it includes all the things that are relevant to that one unit. It does not include all the R&D you did for 2, 3, 5 years to come to that point, right? But to deliver that one unit, what did it take? So it could obviously take some materials if you're building a hardware product. It takes some labor to build that particular unit, and there are other direct expenses, right? So here are the examples. So if you're looking at IdeaForge, a drones company, then the cost of sensor, batteries, avionics, assembly, all of that will be the value creation cost for that one drone, right? If you're looking in MolBio, which is molecular biology, actually biggest producer of TB diagnostic machines, and if you did RT-PCR during COVID time, most likely your sample went to there. 50% or so of market is with MolBio. Goa's first unicorn, so that's their claim to fame. So the cost of that one diagnostic machine is the bill of material cost, the assembly cost, the Q&A testing, the software cost are all basically the value creation cost. What is value delivery cost? If all of this is covered here, then what is value delivery cost? Right. Value delivery cost is the cost it takes to deliver that product to the customer. Right? So therefore, it will include all the shipping and logistics cost. It will include all the on-site deployment cost. It will include the training cost, maintenance cost, regulatory and compliance cost for that one unit, not for the overall regulatory compliance that you have, right? So that's basically, so same two examples. IdeaForge would be shipping and deployment certification that this model has CE or whatever else certification that you need to have, right? So that's the certification cost. Training the operators to use it, right? AMC, the annual maintenance cost that you're talking about, they all come here. So these are value delivery costs. MolBio, same thing, setup, training cost, certification. And now in this case, there is an additional cost that for every use of this, I need to have test cartridges, I need to have reagents. All of that is value delivery cost. How you recover is a different matter. That's on the revenue side. This is on the cost side, right? And last one is simple, which is not simple. Last one is CAC, customer acquisition cost. There are different variants of this. So what's important is to have the cost required to get one active user, right? So start by marketing. You will participate in events, you will run some ad campaigns, whatever the way. All is the marketing cost. From there, you will get some users who are interested in buying your product. Then the sales process starts, the sales motion starts. Whatever you do to convert that interested user into a paying user comes under the sales cost. After that, you have to actually get that user to start using your product, because sometimes they buy product and it sits there for a few months before it starts using it. So that onboarding or activation cost also gets incorporated under this in the CAC, right? So everything that you need to spend to get one active good user basically comes under CAC, right? If you go and read these terms, VCC, VDC are not that popularly used. But if you go and read, search on the internet, you will find these two terms, direct cost and cost of goods sold. These are the two which are used to refer to the first two, VCC and VDC combination, right? So that's the, right? I'll give you examples of this. So here's an example, right? We looked at this example, but I want to refresh your memory. and then build on top of it, right? So if you look at Vedantu, first of all, foremost, the first 3 lines are about revenue, right? And we talked about last time that gross revenue, you always want to actually mention that. Even if you give discounts, you less on that, then the third line is net revenue, which is after all the discounts, everything, right? So that's next is the value creation cost. In Vedantu's case, online education, online tuition platform, the value creation cost for them is the cost of all the faculty members, people, teachers, right? Cost of service. So if you are delivering, if I have to deliver, I have to, basically create value for, an end user. I will give you booklets. I will use some platform, which is a video platform. All those costs are in this. Gateway charges, so if I had to pay something for, for using that, it include that. So sum of all of that is direct expenses. Sometimes gateway charges are also put in value delivery charges. So there is some, ambiguity about that part, right? So those are the 3 charges. You can see that faculty expenses, 31,000, 34,000, and 37,000, compared to the revenue, are reasonably large, right? 31,000, 30,000 on 45,000 is 2/3, isn't it? Yeah, 2/3, 66, 67%. So it's a large expense that you're incurring right up front, right? Just by paying that money to the faculty members, right? So we'll come to that soon. But this is the second is the value delivery cost, which is how much you have to pay to make sure that people actually benefit from that. The operational expenses, so the cost of running that platform for, whatever that, for that session, what is the cost incurred is basically here. And that's, in this case, OTO, one-to-one classes, right? So one tutor, one student, the cost of that is fairly low. And the last is the customer acquisition cost. And you can see there is both the digital marketing cost as well as the telecalling and total tool expenses. Telecalling is the sales for Vedantu, right? That's where you convert a user who's interested into a paying customer, right? Tools expenses are if you're using some, let's say a CRM tool or some other tool to convert that user into a paying customer, that's tool expenses, that gets counted, right? So that's 14, 16, 18,000, those are the costs. Right? So you can see, roughly speaking, these are 60, 70%, this is minuscule, this is a reasonable number, so roughly half or, so of that. So those are the expenses, right? So what do we do and how do we see whether this is going to work or not, right? That is done by looking at what's called contribution margin, okay? So what is contribution margin? Contribution margin is profit. Well, first of all, actually, profit is revenue minus costs. We break cost into 2 parts, fixed cost and variable cost, right? Now, if you take revenue and subtract out the variable cost, that becomes the profit. That's called contribution margin, right? So if we go back, I'll give you, I'll go back to the Vedantu example and we'll relook at that, right? So, but for the time being, let me use 2 examples. One is Agnikul. So if the launch price, which is how much money I make if I launch one satellite, if I launch one rocket and it has many satellites, let's say, and each of the player who's sending the satellite up is paying me something, that's my launch price. And if the cost per launch is less than that, then obviously unit economics will be positive, because the unit for us is one launch, right? So basically, I want to look at that. So this is a visual way of looking at the same thing, right? It actually, there is the, kind of confuses me actually, but the 3 things together, variable cost plus fixed cost, are the cost, and you add profits to that, that becomes your revenue. Right? Basically, what's happened here is that in that equation, we have basically moved revenue on this one side. We have switched the equation. Right? So that's why if you take fixed cost plus variable cost on that side, then revenue is equal to profit plus variable cost plus fixed cost. So that's basically, yeah. Sorry, say that again.
The revenue needs to be the profit part. It can be the revenue bracket.
Uh-huh.
Be not end at the end of the profit. It can be anywhere.
Can be anywhere.
Yeah, because
No, profit can be negative. Okay, let me say that again. Take the first equation. Profit is equal to revenue minus costs. Take the cost on the other side. So profit plus cost is equal to revenue, right? So it's mathematically it's correct statement, right? So, but you can have negative profits, right? So that's which is why I said it kind of throws me off sometimes. But this is sometimes defined like this, right? The reason to define it like this is that these two, fixed cost plus profits, is contribution margin. That actually what it means is this: profit is nothing but contribution margin minus fixed cost, right? Therefore, the term contribution margin, right? Contribution margin really is how much margin every unit of sale is giving you to cover your fixed cost, right? So basically, if you're making 10 rupees per unit of making, that's a profit, right? If your profit is 10 rupees per unit sold and your fixed cost is 1000 rupees, then you need to sell at least 100 of these units to break even with your fixed cost, with your 1000 rupees, right? So that's basically with the fixed cost. So that's basically what it talks about, right? And I'll talk about it. So it's not like this is the last time I'm mentioning. We'll have, right? So bottom line, actually, because positive contribution margin is at least showing you profitability at a unit level, it is a very important milestone in a startup's journey, right? You want to actually look at that. So let me use examples, because this becomes definitions become a little daunting, right? So let's look at the contribution margin, again with Vedantu example. Same numbers, no number change, right? So we know these equations. Contribution margin is revenue minus variable cost, and variable cost is VCC plus VDC plus CAC, right? Now, if you take the revenue and subtract only the VCC from that, which is the value creation cost, is a term called CM1. This is used, actually used a lot by VCs, investors, right? Because it tells you fundamentally, are you going to make money or not, right? So in this case, the CM1, because the cost of faculty or the production costs are very high, the contribution margin 1 is 14% or so, right? So that's first level of costing. Then you take the next one, right, which is your value delivery cost, and you subtract that also from revenue, right? So then basically it becomes CM2 is revenue minus VCC minus VDC, right? If you take those two out, whatever is left with you is called CM2, and as you can see for Vedantu, that was in 7% range, right? And if you take the third one, right, which is basically also subtract the CAC from that, then you get CM3, right? So that's the number that was for Vedantu, minus 29, minus 31, minus 33. So see, in fact, as the months are rolling by, it's going downwards, right? So it's making more and more losses, so to say, right? So question therefore is, what's the intuition? Why are we doing all this, right? So the idea is this. If you look at VCC, okay, yes, please. Should what be, sorry? Okay. So the question is, should CM3 be revenue minus CAC? No, actually CM3 is revenue minus all the variable costs. So it's VCC plus VDC plus CAC, right? What you're saying is CM3 is CM2 minus CAC, correct? So if that equation was CM3 is equal to CM2 minus CAC, yes, that would be. But if you take the revenue back to the the base number, then you have to remove all the variable costs from it. Yeah. All right. So okay, the question is, why are we doing all this, right? The reason it is done, or people, it's important to do this, is the value creation cost, VCC, is core. You cannot get away from it. VDC is very important because it is important. It is needed to deliver value. CAC is the least important. I mean, relatively speaking, it's obviously important. But amongst these three, the value creation cost is very, very core to how you're creating the value. Value delivery cost is augmenting or making sure the value actually reaches the user. And CAC is you get the customer so that they can consume it, right? So if you look at the, the optionality, so to say, that the startup has, you have the maximum optionality in CAC. You can possibly figure out a cheaper way of acquiring customers, hopefully. Then you have optionality in terms of VDC, how you deliver value to customer. You have least optionality in terms of how you create value, right? And therefore, CM1 becomes a very important number, right? In this particular case, a 14% CM1 says this is not going to work because you're spending 80% of your money right up front, 85% of money right up front. You have absolutely no money left to acquire customers, right? So therefore, you are not going to, at a unit level, make money, likely not able to make money, right? Unless there is something dramatic happens, right? So that's basically the intuition. So there's the CM1 positive number is very important, and this being a large number is very, very important because that gives you money for these two. Rather, I should say that leaves aside money so that you can spend on other activities, right? So that's the intuition here. So how do people use it? If there are any questions, please ask because, okay. All right, please. Where does GST come into this? GST comes after this. So, there's a term, this is called EBITDA, right? Earnings before income tax, depreciations and amortization. So the income tax part is where it comes. So this is, after this comes the other. So these are only variable costs. Then you have to reduce minus the fixed cost. Then we have to minus the G&A cost, right? Which are the general administrative cost. So it comes a little downstream. Yeah, so, and then there's called PAT, which is profit after taxes, right? So, okay, I shall not move.
What did Unacademy do apart from Vedanta to make it profitable?
What did Unacademy do to make it profitable?
I mean, the process will be same, right, for all the edtech companies.
Let me first tell you what Vedanta did to make it profitable, then I'll answer that question. Yeah. Otherwise, they would not be a unicorn, right? So the reason they became big and they're making hundreds of million revenue is something. This clearly shows that this is tough to make it work, right? So which obviously Vedanta also saw, right? So it's obvious. So what they did, they moved from OTO, one-to-one, to a thing called OTF, one-to-few, which is that in a tuition class, you don't have one student, you get 5-10 students, right? So that's one-to-few. And then they move to what they call OTM, which is one-to-many, right? So you can have hundreds of students, 200 students, 1,000 students in a classroom, and you try to basically tell, hold that session, right? So which is what actually Vedanta did. They moved from this OTO to OTF and OTF to OTM. What is the intuition? Intuition is the cost of teacher is the maximum, right? CM1 is a problem here, 14%, right? The reason CM1 is a problem is because 70-80% or 70 to 80% money is being given to teachers, right? Rightly so, they are teaching the class, so they should get the money, right? But if we can get more students paying the same amount or a little less amount, then you can, so if you have 5 students, you're making 5x money. So even if you don't pay 80%, you pay them 70%, they will make more money, right? The teachers will make more money, but you will have more money left for yourself also. Right? So that's basically the CM1 importance. You have to look at CM1 and say, is it going to work or not work? In this case, it was not working. So they moved to one-to-many, hundreds of students in the class. And how did the numbers change? Right? So the numbers actually change. So these are not per unit numbers, these are gross numbers. These are, so you have to divide them by, per student, which I don't do it in the book and I don't do it here because that's an information that Vedanta doesn't want to share. Right? So revenues went up, but good news, the faculty expenses came down, and you can see that in CM1. From 14-15% jump to 60+%, right? And that is what gave them a possibility of saying, okay, maybe we can make money here, right? The CM2, the reason it actually, it increased from 2.5 lakhs to 5.35 lakhs is because the minute you have 100 students in a class, you now need, a teacher cannot pay individual attention to every student, right? So what Vedantu did was that they said, okay, we'll have tutors. For every 5-10 students, we'll have one tutor. That tutor will take care of an individual student. Will track, will it's like a care manager, right, of Onco. Right? Make sure that this student is paying enough attention in the class. If the student is asking some questions which the tutor thinks is not a global question, they will answer it themselves. If they think it reveals that people have not understood the concept, they'll escalate it to the teacher and teacher will explain it again to the class. So they built a mechanism and that added the cost of the academic mentors. Right? Now the mentors are paid less than teachers. Teachers are star teachers. I mean, this is how the quota model works. Right? You get star teachers who are really good in what they do and people are willing to pay more. Tutors are paid less because they also have lesser skills. Right? So that's basically that. Now you look at these numbers. So we are good in CM1, 60 odd percent. We are good in CM2, 50 odd percent. But CM3 is still bad. Right? It is, in fact, if you see, the numbers actually have jumped up. Right? The reason it jumped up was, by this time, others realized, Unacademies and the Byju's of the world, that actually online tuition works. And we can actually do a good job and we can make money. So there was more competition. And that happens with a lot of startups. The minute you start succeeding, competitors will come in and your CAC will go up. Your ability to acquire customers will become tougher, as in it will be more expensive. And that's what happened with Vedantu. Right? So that's why the numbers actually, you would almost think that now it would be positive, because look at those numbers, they were 7 to minus 26, so that's 36%. They are going from 50 to minus 18 to 68%, right? So a dramatic change in the market condition, right? So that, but still, good news, CM1 is good, CM2 is also good. CM3 is a problem, solvable problem. That's what this CM1, CM2, CM3 tell you, right? You want to make sure CM1 is good, you want to make sure CM2 is good. CM3, you can figure out how to improve, right? So that's the most important point here. Yeah, it's okay? Yes, sir.
So in the startup's life cycle, you're expecting it to grow very fast, right?
Okay.
So your CAC shouldn't it increase exponentially along with your acquisition and revenues?
So CAC, so question is, does the CAC go up as the startup grows? So actually there are two factors that play here. One is that when you're targeting early majority, when you're targeting the co-creators and early adopters, typically your CAC is very, very low because they are looking for better solutions. So you go to them and you tell them they're already looking around, it is very easy to convert them. So CAC is actually very low in the beginning, right? Then the CAC goes up when you actually start targeting the early majority. Right? It goes up for basic reason because you have not yet figured out what are the right channels for you. Right? So the CAC is high. Over time, CAC comes down. As you figure out how to acquire customers, what the right positioning and what's the right mechanics of converting them, CAC normally comes down. The uncertainty market comes when the competitors enter and the competition starts, and your cost of marketing goes up, the cost of running ads goes up, cost of converting them goes up because they want to talk to alternatives also and compare. That's when the CAC actually goes up. Right? So typically CAC is low in early adopters, goes up early majority, then declines. Unless competitor comes, then it goes up again. So that's how normally it happens. Sorry? What year are these revenues? These are representative numbers. These are not real numbers. These are roughly 2017, 2018, that time frame. So fairly early in their journey.
This would not be what it is today.
No, of course not. I would not be putting them out there. They're a private company. They're not public companies. So these are not even correct numbers, exactly correct. They've been changed a little bit to make certain points, right? So, and you'll see the point soon, right? All right. So now that we have CM1, CM2, CM3, and we CM, let's say, is positive. So you're making some money. In this case, we were not. Vedantu was not. But let's say you are making some money. Then CM is basically how much revenue each unit is contributing to cover your fixed costs, right? So we now need to look at fixed costs again. So what are the fixed costs? Fixed costs are all the costs that you have to put in to build that product, right? So your R&D costs, salary costs, rents, whatever else, right? So everything that goes, and which does not change based on the number of units you're selling is in fixed cost. For Vedantu, like we talked about last time, the fixed costs are the content development expenses, which is all the content cost, right? Platform expenses, branding expenses, employee salaries, blah, 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 right? So all the cost that you incur on a global basis come here, right? So that's basically 1.4 CR here, and what were you making here? We are making minus 9.3, minus 6.7, and minus 5.5, right? The good news is that number is positive, right? So let's look at that now. So what does it mean, right? So what you do next is, and this is last step, so that's it, there's no more. So this is the last step. So now you say, okay, CM is how much revenue each unit contributes. And what I want to do is eventually I want the CM to amortize my fixed cost, right? Every unit is giving me delta, eventually should add up so that my fixed costs are covered. After that, I'll start making profits, right? So that point, so the red line, first of all, is total fixed cost, which typically is not flat line, is slightly upwards. It goes a little bit up because you have to hire more people and so on and so forth, but more or less flat. The blue line is the contribution margin, what we talked about. This is CM3, right? This is all the contribution, right? And before the break-even point, right, where these two intersect is break-even point. Before that, you're making loss per unit, and after that, you're making profit per unit, right? You're not profitable. You're not PAT, you're not profitable after taxes. You're per unit profitable, right? That's called operating profit, right? So at the break-even point, revenue is equal to total cost. So your variable cost as well as your total costs are covered, right? So you're actually operatingly, neutral at that point. After that, you're positive. So that gives you a point saying, okay, how many units I'll have to sell so that I can start becoming profitable, right, at an operating level, right? So that's why this number is very, very important. You have to actually figure out for your company, for your product, what would those be, right? So it also helps you to understand what scale you will need to operate at. And I think this ties back to the pricing, what we talked about last time. So whether you're selling your product for $1 or $100 or $1,000, also tells you how many units you need to acquire to get to a certain revenue. So the pricing also indirectly plays a role in here, right? So, but I'll not complicate matters more by bringing it in. I'll leave it at that. I think conceptually, I think it should be clear that there is at up to a certain point, your companies will make loss. After that point, they'll start making profits, right? So that's basically, so you need to figure out what is that number, what is that break-even point, right? So that's what we need to do. All right, so let's look at this. How do you really calculate it? It is basically formula is fixed cost divided by revenue per unit minus variable cost, basically CM, right? So that's basically the, that's the formula for calculating the break-even points, right? Now for Agnikul, question therefore becomes, okay, how many launches do I need to, how many satellites I need to have, right? How many revenue I need to make so that I can, make profit on that unit basis, right? So that's basic. Actually, no, sorry, take it back. Now we're looking at fixed costs, right? So to get to a break-even point, you have to look at how many times I need to launch my rocket and how much delta money I make from each launch so that my fixed costs get covered by those many launches. So that will tell Agnikul what is the scale they need to operate at to become profitable, right? Look at log9 materials. It will be how many batteries you must sell in order to delete that cost of aluminum air, LTO batteries, right? How many batteries you must sell in order to cover all the R&D costs that went into first figuring out aluminum air batteries, then moving to LTO batteries, then optimizing and so on and so forth. So all that cost needs to get covered. That's what they need to come to a point.
Why is R&D cost missing in that?
It should be there. All it should be. Basically, what you're doing is you are covering all your fixed costs. So every R&D cost definitely comes there.
So good examples. One, because Log9 has got fairly, the revenue is in small and continuous. But
Right.
Agnikul is very lumpy.
Yes.
So what I'm not understanding is Agnikul's R&D costs would be extraordinarily high, and one launch may not really move the needle at all for them. So
Okay.
if I have to load the entire
No, okay, so there are 2 points you're making. So question is, number one, Agnicool has lumpy spends. Spends are large, but the revenues are lumpy because every time a rocket goes up, they make some money. Rest of the, that duration, they don't make money, right? So therefore, how many such launches they need to cover the R&D or cover all the fixed cost, right? And also they have maybe other higher fixed cost, which are manufacturing facilities, whatever. Log9, on the other hand, has batteries, smaller units, many more can be sold, and so on and so forth. And therefore, revenue is more steady, right? But the R&D cost and fixed cost are still very much there, right? So, ask your question again with that.
So what I'm trying to say is that is it fair to just take the actual R&D costs and load it onto the fixed cost? Is it something that should be, a capital expense?
No. So let's go back. Let's go back to definitions here, right? So fixed cost are any cost you will incur to make sure your product is out in the market, minus all the costs that are per unit. So Agnicool's example, all the work that you did, and I think I have an example of Agnicool or not. Maybe I don't, because I think one of the teams is doing Agnicool as an exercise. So I didn't want to talk about that too much. But so let's say Agnicool, all the effort they have put in to get to a point that they have validated all the ability to take a flight sub. So what they have done so far, they first did a first launch, Agni-led. Then they did Agniban, where they did the suborbital, and I think he knows way more than I do. But so they basically come to that point, right? Now, all of that is R&D cost, which has to be here. We are not loading anything anywhere. We are saying these are the costs. Now the question is, how many launches that you need to have to break even that, to make sure that cost is covered in a year or in a time frame that you pick, right? Typically a year. Right? So,
Take this thing, setting up the production facility.
Right.
If normal practice is say it took some 10 crores to set up the factory.
Correct.
It will be amortized over 10 years, and that amortized part would come and sit in the fixed cost.
No. So that's where the EBITDA comes in. So earnings before income tax, depreciation, amortization. That's where the depreciation of your assets and amortization of assets comes in. That's a financial metric. When you are a startup, you don't look at that, because if you don't have money, all that financial metrics don't matter. Working capital is what we are working with. So which is why we don't worry about the amortization. You take the cost and you say, okay, can I make money? There's one more concept after this, which I have not covered, is what is the payback period. So how long will it take for a company to recover all the money, right? Is it going to be 1 year? Is it going to be 5 years, 10 years? That's the thing. But let me address that.
So all this is not about accounting meaning of these terms, but stay cash flow positive.
Yeah, correct. So we are not, again, that's a very good point for you that you raised. See, what I want to emphasize is, as a startup, accounting is not important. What is important is cash flow. So what is important, what we're talking today right now is how is money flowing in and flowing out, right? A lot of emphasis gets paid on accounting, and people build these big Excel spreadsheets with all EBITDA, everything done. Actually, that doesn't matter, because what matters is a cash flow, right? And I think that's what we are focusing on right now. So cash flow is important. That's what the startup finance is all about. Accounting should not be part of that vocabulary. It is, unfortunately, but it should not be. Yeah. But your point, I'll actually come to that in the next slide. So let's come there. Right. So this is the slide that I was talking about. Let's finish this point. Agnicool has a lumpy revenue stream. It has certain R&D costs. It needs to make sure that lumpy revenue stream covers the costs that they have, fixed cost. Log9 Materials has a more continuous revenue stream because they can keep selling batteries. But the same issue, they still have to cover the fixed cost. In both the cases, every unit should make them some money. In Agnicool's cases, let's say they have an ability to launch every month. So then there are 12 launches. Then in that within those 12 launches, they must recover all the fixed cost if they want to be break even, if you want to be break even positive or operating positive. Log9 can sell many more batteries, but across all those units, we want to know how many batteries you need to sell so that you are, in the operating profit zone, right? So let's look at a specific example, how this is used, right? So this is example again of Vedantu, right? And like I said, it is negative. It was negative. CM3 is minus 18, minus 14, minus 10. And the fixed cost of this, which is in crores, so we are like order of magnitude different away. And what you do is you basically using the formula on the previous slide, which is break-even point is fixed cost divided by contribution margin. You take that, you draw a line for that. The blue line here is the dark blue line is the fixed cost as per the numbers that are there. The dotted blue line is a projection forward. It's a linear projection forward, very straightforward, nothing sophisticated here. Contribution, same thing. It is negative, right? This line is 0. So below that is negative, but it is tending positive. So you draw that line out saying, okay, if we are tending positive, we will become positive at some point. When will we start making enough money that we cover the fixed cost? That number gives you how many months in this case will take for you. It will take you to become operating in the operating profit zone, right? For them, this was turning out to be 90 plus months, 90 odd months, right? But it was positive. 90 months is more than 7 years, right? Not a good time. This is what's called payback period. How long will it take for a company to start becoming positive? 7 years is a very long period. Things can change dramatically as they have, right? They went up during COVID, they came down after COVID, and they came down or they get impacted by other factors, right? So therefore, this was good news that they were actually on the positive path, but they had to do something to accelerate that, right? So that's basically what it is. What did they do to accelerate it? They did JE. They went into the cash cow of India, which is do the engineering college entrance exam preparations, which really made them make money. The numbers became much better, but they had the platform to do all of that. They had the systems to do all of that. So they were able to launch one more product on top of it to make that money, right? So now you want to ask your Unacademy question again? You got it, okay. So I think eventually everyone realized that the money in India is actually in the engineering college entrances, right? Which is what everyone moved to. So there's a concept of profit pools and revenue pools. And I think I mentioned that long ago, but it's good time to go back to that. The revenue pools is how much money is, where is the money getting spent, right? So in this particular case, if you look at the revenue pools, there's revenue pool for school education, the revenue pool for entrance exam, there's revenue pool for college education, there's revenue pool for continuing education. And of course, then in between there's a revenue pool for competitive exam for jobs, right? So these are different revenue pools. The other concept is profit pool. In which of these can you make more money, profit, right? It turns out in India, the maximum money can be made is in entrance exams. Either entrance exam for undergrad or grad level or getting jobs. If you look at 3 companies, the first 3 unicorns in EdTech, Vedantu was focusing on entrance exams. Byju's was focusing on, Vedantu was focused on undergrad entrance exams, JEEs and NEETs. Byju's was focusing on entrance exam at the grad level, CAT and others. And Unacademy was focusing on entrance exam for banking and government jobs, right? So there were 3 different strategies that 3 had, all in education, but very different strategies, but targeting those 3 profit pools. Eventually, obviously, everyone did everything because once you see that others are succeeding, obviously you want to succeed there also. But different strategies, 3 companies, which again ties back to their 3 different value strategies. Performance-based strategy for Vedantu, effort-based strategy for Byju's, and access-based strategy for Unacademy. Yeah, so those.
Vedantu and Byju's are also doing for 6 through 12, right?
Yes.
Is that a profit pool?
No. Profit pool as in you're not losing money. So is Vedantu and Byju's, are they losing money from class 6? Now they do class 1 KG, but K-12, right? So kindergarten to 12th. Right? Do they make losses from that? No, they make profits, operating profits. But are they is that the largest profitable area? No. So profit pools are where are the large chunks of profit that are lying around. You want to eventually tap into that if you want to build a. Actually, ideally you want to find that out upfront and go straight there. If not, you want to eventually tap into that, which is what Byju's and Vedantu did. They started with 6 to 12 in both the cases, or school students in both the cases, and eventually figured out, where to, make profits. So little different journeys actually. Byju's started with CAT exams and came to this, and Vedantu started with class 6 to 12, went 1 to 5, then went to entrance exams. So slightly different strategy, but eventually, boils down to the same thing. Okay, let's look at example of a deep tech company and see what the break-even point works for them. Right? So Sedemac is a company which is in the control systems. They are Professor Sashi was a IIT Bombay professor, and he left that. Actually, maybe recently left it. He started this company with 3 of his students, who became the CEO, CTO, and CPO, and he became the CEO of the company. This work was started when they got funding from the Department of Science and Technology, DST. So that's where they did the R&D TRL 1 to 3 thing they did there. 2007, they got TVS Motors and Sona Koyo to get interested in what they were doing, and they came to them saying, oh, you're doing a good job, can you build a product out of that, right? Or can you convert that into something that we can also use, right? So that's where the co-creator comes in, with a real, actual market need, actual specifications, and a promise to you, to the startup saying, if you build it, I'll buy it, right? That's what they. In fact, often, like I mentioned before, co-creators also give you money. So they give you some grant money, some angel funding. Right? With that, they went and raised 2.5 million from Nexus Ventures and India Innovation Fund, and that's basically got them going. So MUP and MVP for them was basically building this smart ignition technology. Right? So that's basically when in 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, actually a lot of research gets done across the world for 4-wheelers, which is how efficient your engine is. How, if you put in 1 unit of petrol, how much energy can you get out of it? That R&D was not getting done for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. So that they figured that's an area that they can actually do and make better engines, and which is why engines in India have improved, in terms of how much pollution there. Right? So that got them all the large OEMs in India to sign up with them. TVS Motors, Hero, Mahindra, Tata Motors, everybody basically said, this is good technology, we want to license it from you. So that's what they did. So the question is this, right? So there are 2 different business models they use. So pre-product market fit, the first were basically licensing. They were a team out of technical institute. They did not have manufacturing capabilities or experience. So they felt the best way for them is to demonstrate the possibility. They built some motors, ignition system, but then they said, we will not get you manufacturing. You license it from me and you give me the licensing fee. At some point, they figured, okay, that's good, but I'm not making as much money as I can, right? And that's the post-product market fit, which is when they actually said, okay, we will build these injection units. We will build this engine and we'll give it to you, right? And that's basically what they started doing. So fuel injection system, battery charging controllers, and so forth. These are products they started building. So so the question is, why did Sedemac adopt this business model in the pre-product market fit? Can you guys guess? Why did they not go straight to the second one, which is product-based revenue from hardware units? Because any smart guy will know that you can make more money from hardware units and you make less money from licensing. So why was Sedemac, clearly, smart people, why did they not do that?
Huge. It could either be that they were only developing the technology and not all the other, let's say, certifications and things like that needed for the thing, or it could be capital needed to set up.
All right, so all right, yes, great. So you answered The second part is the answer. So the answer is, why did they not do it? Because it increased the fixed cost. So if you have to set up a manufacturing plant and you have to start manufacturing it, you need much more money. Your fixed cost goes up, right? So therefore, the number of units you need to sell to recover that fixed cost, also changes, right? So you need that much longer to recover that money, right? So of course, you're making more money per unit, but how long does it take to recover the money becomes very, that becomes a little bit unknown, right? Which is why what Sedemac did intentionally to actually reduce the fixed cost so that they can recover their cost faster and become profitable faster. And then they can flow back their profits into doing this. If they had done this right up front, they would have diluted more. They would have had to raise more equity, more money, and they would have diluted themselves more, right? And yes.
There is a small risk to this.
Yes.
You are giving it to the big guys.
Yes.
They always reverse engineer and then do it in house.
Exactly. There's another risk. The other risk is that one is, of course, your customers can reverse engineer and then kick you out of that. The other risk is a competitor can come, build a product and give that end-to-end unit to a customer. So the customer's fixed cost goes down and you basically are switching, right? You're taking risk so there are two risks in this, right? But that's a decision a startup has to make, looking at the market conditions. And I'll come back to this point again, actually, or is it right here? No, it's not here. It's there in one of the future slides. I'll come back to that. It's actually very interesting, decision. You have to balance. It's a balancing act that you have to do. So which is why startups are tough, right? So, but yeah, that's a decision.
Why they did not use contract manufacturing? Because assuming that there is no extraordinary manufacturing process involved in the making of this fuel
Injection system, yeah.
system.
Yeah. So why did they not use contract manufacturing? See, contract.
The same tire, like the tire 2, 3 suppliers of Solar could have made those parts for.
Possibly. So okay. So question is, why did they not use contract manufacturing, right? To reduce the fixed cost, right? I think what happens is, if you want to get a contract manufacturer to be on your side, you still have to give certain units to them, right? So you have to still get to a certain scale before it becomes viable for a contract manufacturer to work with you, right? Otherwise, the cost of contract manufacturing is very high. If you're building fewer units, then the contract manufacturer charges you more. So that's where I think there's again a balancing act. So if you decide eventually you have to build the product, especially if you're going to integrate many different parts, you will have to build the product. If you're building an individual component, then you can actually, not build it and give it to someone else.
Or it
So,
could be the relationship with the co-creator, because
correct.
Said that when you get into these kind of arrangements, that okay, you will do this part.
Yes.
I take care of the rest of it. And then
That's the comfort a co-creator gives you. That's why it is very, very important to have a co-creator. It is critically important to have a co-creator because, if you look at Agnikul, the reason it was able to launch a rocket was because they partnered with ISRO. They were in Sriharikota. ISRO's team was the launch. They handled all aspects of launch. These guys just gave their rocket, just is wrong word, not devaluing Agnikul. They did all the work they did, but then they handed over the rocket. At that point, they were out of the picture. It was ISRO's process that took over, which was 30 years they have been validated. So there's a synergy, right, that you have to, with a co-creator, you have to create. Right. All right. So last part. And the last part is about business model analysis. So there was a question asked by Ruben about OpenAI. So, in fact, I was looking at that over the last several months. I've been looking at that. And, you wonder often what's going on, right? If you see OpenAI is valued at $300 billion, right? Which is, I think, more than the total value of all the Indian startups, maybe. I don't know. Anthropic is right now in conversations to raise money at 60 billion valuation or so. It was in this last year, it was 18.4, which had come down for 30. So it had reached 30 and then they fell, right? So this is despite the confusion that was created by DeepSeek, right? So there is reasonable amount of positive outlook towards, uh, you know, LLMs of the world, right? So the question is, what's going on here? And does it get justified by the other parameters that are there in the market, right? And let me ask, do you think it's justified or do you think it's all hype? OpenAI and Anthropic. Anthropic obviously has Claude as the model that you might have used, and OpenAI is OpenAI, ChatGPT. Right? Do you think justified or all hype? Too high. Okay, it'll come. Anyone disagrees with that? We're all in the hype zone. All right, let's look at the numbers. So here's the revenue that these two companies are making. Right? So if you look at that, OpenAI is making $5 billion revenue, and Anthropic is making roughly $1 billion in revenue. Right? So the revenues actually are not trivial, right? But if you take 5 billion and on the other side is 300 billion, there's a 60x multiple. Typically, these numbers are in the 10 odd, 5 to 10 for a reasonably well understood space, and 10 to 20 for a optimistic, growing stage, right? So that's the kind of numbers that you can expect. 60x is obviously, that means there is something really, extraordinaries that people are seeing in OpenAI. Right? But so we'll leave the hype aside. We'll ask the question, between these two companies, OpenAI and Anthropic, which one is better? Right? So clearly, OpenAI is 5 billion revenue, and Anthropic is 1 billion. So it's a 5x larger company. Right? To do that, you have to actually go back and start understanding where are they, how are they making the money, right? And what are the costs? So basically, those are the only things we work with, right? So the revenue, let's look at the quality of revenue, not just the number, but the quality of revenue. So this graph shows the breakup between the chatbot subscription, which is retail users, individuals, right, and API-based pricing, which is typically paid by enterprises, right? So you can see the numbers. OpenAI is 28% from APIs and 72% from chatbot, while Anthropic is 85% from API and 15% from chatbot. So it's, they are kind of inverse of each other, right? Interestingly, Claude is a little more expensive, right? You would expect OpenAI to be expensive because everyone knows about them. ChatGPT was the first player which actually proved that this can be useful, but Anthropic charges more, right? Which actually also kind of indicates perhaps they have larger margin opportunity because they're making more money per unit, right? Now you have to look at then the fixed cost, which is that what are their fixed costs? And actually this is the number that they don't publish, so we don't know. But you would think they would be roughly in the same ballpark because they're both releasing a new model, every 6 to 9 months. So they must be spending as much time in training the model, and frequency and all of that must be roughly the same. But we don't know, right? But then we look at the variable costs. So variable costs, we can break them down into two parts: direct costs, which are VCC and VDC, value creation cost and variable value delivery cost. In their case, these are corresponding to the compute cost. When you actually ask ChatGPT a question or Claude a question, it has to go back and run your thing on a server, which is either by Microsoft for OpenAI or by Amazon for Anthropic. And those are the two large investors in those two companies also. So they're kind of getting money back from them in some sense. Right? The CAC is relatively, you would say that CAC will be a little higher for the enterprise customer because retail customers are signing up on their own, but enterprise customers, you have to do a meeting and you have to convert them. On the other side, they don't churn away. Once they sign up, they get their company to start working with your APIs, they typically stay with you. So therefore, the churn is normally lower for a large company, right? So based on this, I think I know. Let me ask you guys, does this help you to say one is better than the other? You think OpenAI, we are not talking a large company, we're talking which one will become profitable first, right? Do you think OpenAI will become profitable first or Anthropic? Anthropic is the thing. Yeah, so it's an unknown, we don't know, but Here's a data point. So this is a data point of how the numbers are falling, how the revenues are falling per million token. So this is a number. August 24 is when Claude 3.5 was released. Now we have 3.7. So it has moved forward. But when the 3.5 was released, you can see the price dropping from roughly $6 per million token to 3.5 per million token. Right, so there's a nice 50% reduction. This is pre-DeepSeek, right? So this is, and you can see this margin dropping from 75% to 55%. Dave, can you check if there's any question? All right, so that's basically what gives a hint saying, there is a pressure in, amongst these players because of increasing competition. The margins are coming down. And the question is, what is this margin? And how does it compare, this gross margin number or whatever term, and how does it compare with the contribution margin that we are talking about? Right? Because you will see this number used very often if you go on the internet. And what is gross margin becomes a question. Is it CM1, CM2, CM3, something totally different? Anyone has any guesses? This gross margin term you have heard? Margin, how much is the margin of the company? Have you heard SaaS companies have 80% gross margin? Yeah, so margins is very common. Actually, let me use this. Let me show you some gross margin numbers and ask you actually maybe. What do you think would be the gross margin for Apple? All Apple put together, iMac, iPhone, everything that they sell. What would be the gross margin? Or let me first define what gross margin is so that you have something in your head. So gross margin is basically roughly same as you take it's a CM2. So you take the direct cost out, but you don't worry about the customer acquisition cost. So all the revenue minus the VCC and VDC, right? That's CM2. So CM2 is basically same as gross margin. What is the term used in popularly in all the media is gross margin. They don't talk about contribution margin 1, 2, 3, but CM2, right? So with that CM2, so take the revenue minus all the variable cost for delivering that value. Forget about the customer acquisition cost. That's your CM. That's your gross margin. So what would be that for Apple? 70%. More than 100. More than 100 तो हो ही नहीं सकता. अभी नीचे revenue is you cannot exceed revenue, right? Unless direct cost is negative, which can be for AI will increase productivity without human beings in the loop, but first time in history. Not more than 100, yes. Okay, what's your basis for 70 and what's basis for 50? Lower than 70, okay. 40%.
Actually, they say that
1 is to 5 is said, okay, that's you bring out a good question. So normally you would hear this term saying 5x should be your multiple, right? 5x multiple is on the marketing spend. For every dollar you spend, you want to make, or every dollar you spend on sales and marketing, you want to make 5x of that. So normally that's how it's looked at that. That's why we are going through this. You'll see the numbers, yeah. SpaceX. I should have asked you first. SpaceX, for all the marketing that they do, actually is barely profitable. It turned profitable for first time in Q1 2023, and it makes minuscule profits. So it's tough to make profits in some business. Actually, SpaceX is very close to airlines. Airlines don't ever make profits. There are only 3 airlines which are profitable in the whole world, I think, is what I had heard at one point. Indigo being one of them. So, yeah.
I think that includes the revenue generated by Starlink, internet constellation.
Do you think so? Okay, so I don't know if 1.5 billion revenue of SpaceX include the Starlink, because I thought Starlink was a separate company.
They disclose the revenue for Starlink much more frequently than for the.
I see. So I don't know. Okay, yeah. Tesla, any guesses? How much profits? What's the gross margin? 20 to 30. Okay, this guy is going too low. He's suppressing the. Anyone more than 50, more than 20 to 30? Huh? More than 50. Okay, front row is more than 50.
50% is
30%. Yeah, so it's tough to make money actually in businesses, it turns out, right? So other car makers, the reason Tesla gets so much positive news is not because, I mean, of course they have EV and all that, and they have done FSD and all the good things, but it's because the margins are much higher is from the other car. And why are the margins higher? Because the fixed costs are lower. Why are the fixed costs lower? Because the way they manufacture, the engine is much simpler, right? 50% of the cost of the car is battery, 40%, right? So that's the reason. There are less moving parts. Why is Tesla getting more value than other EV manufacturers? Because the way they manufacture, the assembly line they have set up is modular. Normal assembly line is one running long line, someone gets the chassis, then someone starts putting the axle and the wheel and all that. Tesla engineer said, why should that be the case? Because in software, we know modular software programming. You build a function routine and you call it. You don't write one single program. So they said, actually, that's how it should be done. Let's say the seating unit should get assembled separately. The engine should get assembled separately. And the main assembly line just assembles these assembled things together. That's what helps them reduce the cost and increase the efficiency. That's why their margin is higher. Right? So there's a lot of engineering that went into a Tesla to make it Tesla. Right? And I think we have to look into the details of this, but not to take more time. I'll give you the numbers of all of them. The numbers are actually, ideally you want the numbers, well, now the question, right? Ideally, what do you want the numbers to be, right? 70%, okay. Yeah, because 70 is the highest here. Actually, I will come to that in the next slide, but basically you can see the numbers, and the important number, surprising number, at least for me, was Boston Dynamics. I thought Boston Dynamics would be a hugely positive company, but it is not. And which is why it's been sold thrice. It's the third time now Hyundai has acquired it from Google, I think. So, right. Sorry? Illumina is a company on which all the gene sequencing work gets done. So all the 80% of market is owned by Illumina. So whenever you do your gene sequencing, it's basically likely Illumina machine. Yes. Yes, Apple App Store is part of that. Apple iStore is roughly 22% of the revenue. So all the recurring revenue part of Apple is 22% of that. Right? Including that, it's 40%. That
outsource it to Foxconn to give it at $0 or something, just for marketing.
Sorry, say that again. What did they outsource to?
I heard that Apple, for manufacturing their phones, convinced the Chinese company Foxconn.
Taiwanese company.
To kind of do it for free or something like that initially.
Did Apple convince Foxconn to do manufacturing for them for free? I don't know that. I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that. So, all right. So I'm just going to get to a point of why did CEDEMAC do this, and the correlation between what they did, which is license their technology before product market fit and not build the products, right? The implication of that on gross margin, right? So that's a question one has to ask, because there's a gross margin, there's obviously break-even point moves forward, but what happens to the gross margin, right? Does it also get suppressed or does it get amplified, right? Does it become low or does it become high, right? So that's the question. I will basically answer it in this way. To answer these questions, we go back and look at what we have built so far, right? So you first look at from a revenue proximity. If you license technology, you're giving something to someone who's then bundling into something else and then gets into the eventual product. So you're 2 steps away from revenue. If you give your product, which is power train controller or fuel injection system, then you're 1 step away from the revenue, right? So the proximity therefore becomes closer, right? Therefore you can make more money. So building products will get you more money per unit compared to not building products, right? And therefore, these products will also help you typically get more margins. So although you're bringing your break-even point closer, you're actually doing at the cost of gross margins, right? That's typically the case. And after you fix it, after you go back to building products, you actually build a large profitable company, 540 crore revenue company, 80 million profitable, and return of capital employed is quite good and growing at a good rate, right? But this is because they actually switched over to the actually building products and not licensing, right?
This is the revenue of Sedemac.
Sedemac, yes.
This will license.
No, this is the total revenue. This is last year revenue. After they switched over to the building products, not the license revenue. Right. So therefore the question becomes, can technology licensing ever be used? Just to start off. Any other guesses? Will it ever be useful? ARM is the only example. Wonderful. Yeah.
So, one is to kind of, in the case of AI, where the data comes in,
Right.
kind of helps you improve the performance. So it might be good to compete and collaborate, where you could get more data and kind of become the standard API.
But licensing means you're giving away your core IP to someone else to bundle into their system. So collaboration doesn't come once you license your technology. It's
that Apple is doing with OpenAI and Google for now, that is licensing.
which one are you referring to? What is Apple doing with OpenAI?
So initially they were in talks to integrate OpenAI into their phone.
Okay.
The default AI.
Uh-huh.
Now they recently switched to Google.
Okay, got it. So I don't know the details of that, but I think those are large companies. So let me answer this. I think you gave the answer. ARM is the successful company, which basically makes 95% gross margin, right? Because once you license your technology, your costs are zero. I mean, you do good R&D, you push it out, people use it. ARM is now the undisputed, king in the small like phones, chips and all. So I think you basically make a lot. There's one more scenario where you can make a lot of money. If the technology is evolving very, very fast. So if there's rapid evolution, then it's actually better to license the technology instead of building it yourself. And there's a company called Jinko Solar. It's actually very important for Indian point of view because solar power and solar energy and solar cells, critically important. Most are imported from China right now. A lot of effort in India to actually indigenize it, make in India. And there I think it becomes important to look at, if the technology is evolving fast, then you're actually better off licensing your technology. Let someone else who already has a plant, has already done the infrastructure, let them use it because their incremental cost to monetize is lower. You don't have to incur that cost. Otherwise, you have to set up your own factory, build your solar panels, sell it to the market. So there's a trade-off. So one has to actually look at it in a very close manner to actually decide. Okay, here's the last slide. And the last slide is answer the question, what number should it be, 70% or less, right? So this is a question that we answered using contribution margin, or rather direct costs. So this, you would find variants of this on internet, right? So what I've done is mapped it to the deep tech startups. So first of all, contribution margin, gross margin, payback period. Payback period, we didn't talk about it, but it's the number of years it takes for you to recover all your money. Not just the fixed cost, not just the break-even point, it's slightly further away, right? It's recover all the money, not at a unit level, but all the money that you invested in the startup, right? So actual profitability. So those are important. And second is that there are different pricing strategies. We talked about that. So then the third bullet point, if we treat users as a unit, then revenue per user over how long they spend with you before they churn away is lifetime value, how much they pay you total. And the largest variable cost is what you want to look at, right? Largest variable cost typically is CAC for software companies, and it is typically the direct cost for hardware companies. So you basically look at that. If you're a software company, look at CAC. If you're a hardware company, look at direct cost. So the target should be, if you're less than 1, if your LTV, the money you make is less than what the direct costs are, obviously you're going to die. There's no surprise about that. This is the area which actually most startups end up in, and I've given you the breakup of from there to the gross margin. So if you are a bit less than 3x, basically you are in the 33, 50, 55%, 60% kind of area. That's a dangerous territory to be in, right? Because you're making money, so you're not dying, but you're not profitable enough to invest back to build new products. So what you really want to be is in that green zone. And for you to be in the green zone, you must have more than 67% gross margin. Right? So that's the 70% was actually close enough approximation, and that's basically what people have found over years that you want to be. Early stage startup must be in that, in this zone, because your gross margin will come down as the competition increases. So you have to look at that. So fighting your competitors with lower price is not a strategy. You will not succeed. You will be in this area and you will actually not succeed in the long run. So price is never a differentiator. Unfortunately, lots and lots of startups think that is, it is not. Okay, that's the last slide. Any last questions? Yes.
Once you become a public traded company,
yes.
say a bigger company like we saw it as.
Yes.
So do these metrics still look good, or is it like this is only for early stage?
This is for early stage. See, what happens is if you are a large company, right? Eventually, think about it. Eventually, you cannot grow faster than the GDP, right? If someone has to lose if you have to win, right? In that big picture. So your growth rate will get bounded by the growth, ability for people to spend. So the reason these companies grow faster is because they are adding a new product. So they're actually pulling away money from something else, and which is why they're growing faster. But eventually, it will come down. There's no doubt about it, right? So which is why early stage investing gives you larger returns, but it's also riskier.
Yeah, that is very surprising. 7%.
Yes, it is surprising. It is also, it can be a factor of their fixed costs, right? It could be how much, actually, this is the reason actually Ola gets so much value in the market, right? Although the negativity that gets surrounded from a media point of view, it is the largest margin business that they have built.
If you see Ather's founder, he has, I saw some video where he explained that they apparently don't get some production linked incentives because his factory is already established by the time one came to which Ola has. This could be the same.
Well, they can set one more factory then. They could set one more factory. I don't know. Okay, that's a good point. I don't know the details of that.
The reason why Ola is 18 or but TVS is doing 17. So
yeah, exactly. So I think Ather could be also economies of scale. So as you grow your volumes, the cost at which you acquire your input supplies, comes down.
Even customer acquisition cost for Ola would be lesser.
Sorry, customer acquisition cost for.
Ola, they already have a fleet and like a good chain of established.
Yeah. So see, this brings up a point. In the beginning of any category, effort-led startups typically win. Eventually, performance-led startups are able to take away the profits from them. So the size of the customers might still be in favor of effort-led startup, but the profitability shifts towards the performance-led startups. So if we map Ola to effort-led startup and Ather to performance-led, then it's actually okay for them to be smaller in size. But you would expect the margin to be higher for Ather, not lower, right? So scale can be lower, but the margin should be higher. So something is not right here in this equation. Whether it's because of the PLI scheme or something else, I don't know. But one needs to look at this. These are good indicators for us to dig deeper, saying, okay, why is the number not matching up? Yeah. All right. Yeah. In business model, what's the importance of network effects? Business model, see, network effects, there are four or five ways to create value. Economies of scale, intangible assets, which are brands, patents, and other things that you have. There is the lock-in, saying once you get a customer, they cannot go away. There is sustainable cost advantage. So you are able to build products at lower cost than someone else. So that's the reason Indian startups, SaaS companies win over US SaaS companies, because cost of building that product is much lower. equally good or better product. And last is network effects. In fact, the first is network effects. It has the largest impact. Typically, all 5 of them kick in after you have reached product market fit. They do not kick in before product market fit. So therefore, in the long run, they play a big role, but in this part of the journey, they don't play that big a role. Definitely, because eventually, if you want to say that I want to succeed, then it will play. Going back to his question about log 9, swapping batteries versus charging batteries, right? The question is, what's the cost of setting up that network? If they both have similar cost, then doesn't matter. But if let's say one has higher cost than the other, because network effect kicks in after you have populated the network. So the cost of populating the network has to be borne by the company. So that becomes very important. So if you look at Uber, the reason they had to raise billions to become successful was they were promising 5 minutes or less wait time for drivers, even when there was no demand. What it meant was they had signed up drivers, they had agreed to pay them minimum amount, what they would have made if they were not Uber drivers, just for sitting. But if they got an order, they would be there in 5 minutes or less. So all the cost incurred to set that up and make it work is the cost that the company has to bear, right? Which is why you had to raise like 20 billion or whatever they raise. I don't know, few tens, order of that they had to raise. So setting up a network is expensive, but eventually it pays off. I mean, everyone knows Naukri.com, right? It's a company which has done, or Shadi.com or whatever, matrimony.com. They don't do too much innovation. The product is whatever it was 10 years back. They're still alive. They're still the largest companies. They will not die. Network effect. So yes, it's very, very important, but it pays in long run. All right. Cool. Thank you very much.